Welcome to the Intuitive Therapist Podcast with Janis R. Cohen, therapist, clairvoyant, empath, and medium. Listen in as she takes a no-nonsense deep dive into real human struggles and how to resolve them. Janis will share channeled information from her spirit guide team, as well as the angels and archangels, to help you master your emotional, physical, financial, and spiritual destiny. And now, Janis R. Cohen. Hey y'all, welcome to the Intuitive Therapist Podcast. So glad you're here with me for another week. As y'all have noticed, I have had several guests on in the last several episodes, and I do that to shake it up a little bit. Today is no different. I have with me one of the most special people in my life, my sister, who is also an outstanding counseling psychologist who specializes in helping individuals and couples navigate through marital challenges, divorce, and all sorts of things. And I'm just so happy to have her on because I am excited to have her share her insight, her wisdom, and her expertise, along with herself, about how to navigate relationships and the challenges and abuse and divorce and all of that. And so I know there are a lot of you out there who perhaps might not be happiest in your marriages or want more out of your life or don't know how to navigate divorce in a way that really is effective or actually good. And so my sister, Dr. Wilder, Debbie, is here. Her full name is Deborah. And I want to welcome you today. I'm so happy you're here.
Thrilled to be here, Janis, and I love spending any time I get to spend with you. And you are a phenomenal, not only phenomenal sister, of course, but a phenomenal therapist. And you go above and beyond and reach people in places where I can't. I don't have.
Well, we're here to do that
many
today.
of the gifts. Right. But I appreciate you, including me in this, and I was really looking forward to talking with you today.
Awesome. So you know as well as I do, Debbie, that we get into mental health. Anybody that gets into mental health does it because we need to work on and resolve our own stuff. I mean, any therapist worth their salt will tell you that that's true. And so by us being able to help other people, we really get a sense of purpose and value. And especially when it comes to being able to help people navigate the things that we've been through. And I find that for my entire life, I realized that the theme, and I wrote this in my book, that the theme of my life is to learn, grow, and teach. Learn, grow, and teach. And that I was to use every single part of my life to help others do better, achieve more, be happier, get to where they want to go. And so I know that that same mantra, that same truth guides you. And so as we talk about divorce and we talk about abuse in relationships and all of these things, I really want the listeners to understand how it is that you got into focusing on that specifically, divorce, and really, where did your passion come from with this?
So, as you know, our dad was a psychologist, uh, and the most wonderful man I will ever know. And so, as a little kid, I wanted to be a psychologist even before I knew what it was. And then, fortunately, I
Because of
became a
dad.
psychologist.
Yeah,
Right,
right.
right, and that's just what I wanted to do. And got married, had kids, and then was faced with divorce.
Mhm.
And so it was a rough process. It was the kids were young, and it was an agonizing in many ways, probably 2 years until the divorce was final. And it took me a while to work through what I had to work through as far as my own identity and self esteem and being a single parent to three young kids and trying to coordinate everything. And of course, grateful, grateful, grateful for extraordinary family support. Um, Janice, you were very much a part of that and always
Yeah,
have been.
yeah,
So it was a rough road, but at some point, I became very, very, very passionate about working with people, especially women going through divorce. And I had to go through my own journey to get to a place where I could offer, not only as a psychologist, I'm also, I understand divorce as a mediator as well, but going through and learning my own personal lessons that you can't learn in a book
yeah,
or from a class,
right.
just through my own personal experience. So you had mentioned the learning, teaching, and growing. I think healing is a part of that. That's a huge focus. I know that's a huge focus with you as well. So I just became very passionate about helping people get through this
Yeah,
as best they can, and to discover things about themselves that they never knew they could feel, do, or think, or be. So that it became a passion, I guess, once I maybe crossed a bridge far enough where I could merge my experience with my profession, with my desires
yeah.
to help.
100%, 100%. What do you think for you made up that bridge? What was that? And what did you need to learn as a woman to actually cross over that bridge and get to the other side?
A lot of it, and and it's still an ongoing thing, just a sense of self-esteem, self-worth. Life changed significantly. I had to learn, my own style of parenting, even um, versus my ex-husband's style of parenting. And my kids, they paid a price, unfortunately, for, as most kids do, going through divorce.
Yeah.
Um, but what led to it is really just a determination to uh, feel better and feel uh, a sense of worth and confidence as an individual, divorced individual. But that is, there's no shame anymore.
Yeah.
It took a while to kind of work through that shame and embarrassment of getting a divorce. And, if you think about it, half the population in the United States pretty much gets divorced, but
Right.
there's still shame associated with it.
What's the
And
shame about?
I don't know.
What, like,
Yeah,
for you, what was the shame about? I totally get it, and I can tell you that, you know, if I were in your shoes, I would have felt the exact same way. Even now, if I were to get divorced, I there would be shame. It would
yeah.
be a sense of failure. And so, for you, what was that shame about, and how did you let go of that?
What's interesting, I I remember, Janice, shortly after the process started, I guess, I was going to meet you and Roz and
Mm.
I think Deborah at the time, our sister-in-law, at a restaurant. That was going to be my first time going out after all this stuff started. And I got to the door and I turned around and I started crying because I never wanted to be, I would say, one of those women who
Mm,
is divorced.
yep.
And I now was one of those women who was divorced. And it hit me like a ton of bricks.
Mm,
And we did go back into the restaurant. And, of course, being with you all is healing and wonderful and always fun. But it took a while. And I don't know I don't know how long it took, but now there is beyond zero shame. There's no embarrassment. There's nothing. I I'm proud. I'm not proud of being divorced. I'm not proud of being divorced, but I am kind of proud of being a divorced woman who has worked through
mm.
a lot of what she's needed to work through. So there's a there is usually, as you said before, kind of an initial sense of failure, or really, it's fear. A lot of it is fear. Um, that
What did
I
you
certainly
fear?
felt in the
Yeah.
beginning.
What does that mean for you? What did you fear at the beginning?
I mean, it's you have to. I was afraid of uh, what this would do to my children. I was afraid of financially, what is this going to mean?
Yeah.
Um, really, it's I wasn't worried about me so
Mm,
much as just how's this going to affect the kids,
mm,
and what is this going to look like? Just a lot of change,
yeah.
and yeah. So fear of what I have found is that fear is really the biggest fear, the biggest, most initial, I guess, feeling
Yeah.
right away when someone is,
Right.
starts that.
Right. I have spoken. I have many friends who've been divorced. I've had clients who've been divorced or on the verge of divorce. And the one thing also that I hear is that it's a real big identity shift, real
Mm.
big identity shift. And so we have these ideas of what happiness is supposed to be. And with all the societal pressures of, you date somebody, you get engaged, marriage is always the next step. Well, that's not always the case, right? Times have changed where the traditional way of being a couple, right, doesn't always play out in a lot of people's lives. But when it does, we tend to over identify with the roles that we play. And so, especially wife, mother, partner, caregiver. And so, when you not just began the process of getting divorced, but moved through it and all that. How was your identity impacted?
Was impacted. It was definitely impacted. The fact that I already had my children, so being a mother is first for me.
Yeah,
So that identity didn't change; it just ramped up.
yeah,
And then being a psychologist has always been. I mean, I've been for 30 years a psychologist. Has always been a huge part of my identity. A wife, of course, was a big, 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 big part. It was just what it was. Um, so that I'm very fortunate that I had some more things, important things to balance that.
mm,
Um, but it definitely, it was certainly a shift. I'm
yeah,
not sure how to really, articulate it as much as to no longer be a wife, to
yeah,
be an ex-wife, to not
yeah,
have a husband, to have an ex-husband, and so it definitely is a shift and something that I help folks deal with. I'm sure you do with identity issues as well. Is being able to have a balance and being able to, if you pour everything into one thing and then that thing changes or disappears, then it's again part of the fear is what are you left with?
yeah. And
And
who
so
are
again,
you?
I was
Yeah,
fortunate. Yeah,
yeah.
who are you?
All right.
Yeah,
Yeah, I love your idea of balance and or shall we say create as much balance as you can because the idea of balance is just total bullshit. There really is no balance in life,
right.
but you can certainly work to do that and bring in
Yeah,
certain things.
yeah.
And as with any mm, I guess I'll say this in this context when you attribute meaning to something, then there's a sense of grief. And I believe that for most people, that's the case because I have this saying that people don't get married to get divorced. That's just, they don't bank on that.
Right.
People get married, uh, obviously, because for a sense of belonging and connection and to be able to have a family and all of that. And most people are bad pickers. They just are bad pickers. And I'll say that I'll own it 100%. I've been a bad picker most of my entire life, except for now. But
Hmm.
the reason why people are bad pickers is because they don't know who they are. And unless and until you know who you are, you're going to pick your mates that are going to teach you lessons, not to be able to have a sense of mature intimacy and partnership. And so that is one of the biggest things that I think, and I'm sure you talk about this with your patients, how to be a good picker or a better picker or to really understand who you are. And maybe that's a whole nother topic we can talk about another time.
Hmm.
But I wanted to get in the meat of this, and y'all, I'm going to give you a bio at the end and tell you more about Debbie when we're done. But for the sake of today, we talk about divorce, right? That's tough enough.
Mhm.
But then there's this added attribute of abuse, and whether it's physical, emotional, uh, any kind of abuse, right? And so you have a number of clients, or I believe this is your focus, right? To really help women, especially, navigate abusive relationships. And I want to get into this whole piece of being with a narcissist and navigating through that. I think it's in a lot of ways people throw around that word narcissist, and it's a shame because there are some very, very clear, um, we'll say, symptoms of a true narcissist, not just a one off behavior here and there. But what do people need to know about like what abuse is? Because it could be that people are in abusive relationships and they don't even know it because they've normalized this kind of behavior. But on some level, don't you think they know? So let's talk a little bit about what emotional abuse is.
It's yes, I'm so glad you're bringing this up. Unfortunately, uh, I see a lot of, and there are plenty of men who are emotionally abused as well, and I've worked with a
Oh,
number of them.
100%. Yeah.
But yes, my major focus, kind of what I'm sort of specializing in right now, is helping women get going through divorce from an emotional abuser. And as you were saying before, not every emotional abuser is a narcissist.
Right.
Some emotional abusers, they think they're doing the right thing. They think that, well, this is what my parents did. This is the way it's supposed to be. So it's not excusable, but the intent is also a consideration. It
Yeah.
might just be what is normalized, even though it's hurtful.
Right.
And again, I'm not excusing any of it, but there's a difference between intention, being intentionally malicious, and uh, not, and just assuming that this is the right thing to do. So
Yeah.
there is a difference there. But yes, with emotional abuse, unfortunately, it's like that. The idea of the frog in the pot of water, and that the water is slowly heated up to the point where it's too late for the frog to get out of it by the time it's
Hmm.
boiling, and it's slow. Usually it's an insidious sort of
Yeah.
growth, and it comes across as belittling and controlling and criticizing, and the feeling of walking on eggshells and being gaslighted and all
Yeah.
sorts of things, being isolated. You talk about different kinds of uh, abuse. There's financial abuse, there's sexual abuse to use as a means of power, certainly mental abuse, all sorts of
Psychological.
things.
Yeah, for sure.
A lot of it, taking away the keys to the car if you're being punished, or having your credit card taken away, or your wallet, or what, using the kids, and all sorts of things. And I agree with you. A lot of people don't realize that they're in it, um,
Yeah.
and they're not able to necessarily actively differentiate healthy from unhealthy relationship characteristics. And sometimes people are beaten down. And much of the time, by the time they come to my office, or certainly by the time they would come to you, they're already so low,
Yeah.
and their self worth and self esteem are so low that they often don't have the strength to do this alone. And so they need to be educated, they need to be taught to understand what does this look like, and to work on their own sense of self worth. That gives them the strength.
For sure. It makes sense. Now let's talk about a very popular topic. Is all about this whole narcissist piece, and because that is a really, really tricky, fucked up situation when you connect with a narcissist, and especially for those women who are very empathic, and what I know spiritually is that typically very sensitive people tend to call narcissists into their life. That's just it's like a fly to fly paper, moth to a flame. It's literally that's the truth. And so here we are. Let's talk about the the from the position of being with a narcissist and how that impacts a person from just even in their marriage and then through the legal process of divorce. How does that extend into that? And what can someone expect when facing this kind of legal abuse even?
Yeah, the emotional abuse in a marriage when you're going through a divorce usually becomes legal abuse in the divorce. And so there's a cycle. Just to back up, there's a cycle usually of emotional abuse where there is maybe, the calm or the positive stuff, and then there's a ramping up of agitation or anger, and then the emotional abuser acts out, and at some point will ask for forgiveness, you know, and try to love bomb or whatever. There's a cycle and it happens over and over again. And there's also something called a discard phase in the cycle of emotional abuse when the abuser is done and literally will discard the
Yeah,
spouse,
yeah.
whether it's through it. It can be a shock. It can be literally all sorts of ways to literally discard the spouse.
And this is specifically
Sometimes,
with narcissists. They will,
yeah, narcissists, yeah,
when
yeah,
they're done,
definitely. When
right?
they're done, unless they need their supply again, and then
Wow.
they do what's called hoovering, and they try to suck that person back in. But not emotional abusers will also discard, but narcissists are especially equipped to do that, and they're often very charming, or nobody else
Oh,
sees it except the spouse, and that's another difficult thing with being emotionally abused because if nobody else sees it, it's embarrassing. It's hard
yeah.
to admit or prove. But then you move on to divorce, and unfortunately, those it becomes a high conflict, usually a high conflict, dirty divorce, and the abuser will kick the can down the road, have the attorney file motion after motion, move the goalpost, use the kids as pawns, have temporary protective orders, have the police involved, all sorts of disgusting, horrible. And I'm working with a number of women right
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
Awful, awful, awful. I'm working with one particular person who was discarded, and it was caught on video. Um, over 2 years ago, and she didn't see her kids for this first 6 months. I mean,
Mm,
so that's an extreme kind of situation, and we're still working through that. And I'm so proud of her, so proud of her.
mm.
One of the things too is once, and I'll go back to the court thing, but once people get out of the toxic environment, they're just that gives them the opportunity to grow
It's like
and to heal.
magic. Yeah.
It is like magic. It takes time, but it's getting it out of their system and really being able to see things. So that's a very critical part of the healing process. But going through divorce, being able to maintain your sanity is so important
God, how
because
do you do that?
any
I
opportunity.
mean, how do you do that?
Well,
Seriously.
yes, yes. At the time when you are feeling the worst you've probably felt in your life, and the most critical moments when you have to maintain your sanity, because if you don't, the other side's going to use it against you.
Yeah.
They're going to use it, find any opportunity much of the time to use your mental state and your emotional state. So being able to cope with, shifting sands and the turning tides and all of that, any moment, being able to pivot and have that strength is very, very important. And that's something that we work on a lot because imagine, I mean, I don't know, and thank God I did not have to go through this, but if for whatever reason going through divorce, if something happened and I was not able to, and it wasn't my fault, I didn't do what I was accused of doing, and I wasn't able to see my children for 6 months.
Oh God.
And I don't know, but people survive and they become stronger. So learning how to cope with the catastrophic events of this kind of a divorce. And not every divorce is that way. There's some that are really, really smooth and really easy,
Yeah,
but this is a special kind of divorce, and it really requires a lot of help from a number of different sources.
for sure, for sure. What I know that any parent, at least that I've worked with, and most parents that I know, their first concern is the children. Just like you said, that's if you're a parent and you actually care about your children, they're going to be your first concern, right? So it's often not easy to protect them when you're in such an adversarial experience. And really truly the kids are the ones that suffer most, like they really do. Adults, we can bounce back, we can reframe, we can kind of settle our nervous systems to an extent. But the kids really, when they're in such a embattled uh, experience watching this happen and they're being pulled in, that it's horrible. It's horrible. And so how do you navigate these parents through that when there's such discord and sickness and toxicity and all of that through these difficult divorces?
It's very important to not disparage the other parent.
Oh, huge. Yeah.
Um,
You did a great job of that.
whatever,
Let's say that.
well, and thank you.
You made
I
a
did a
choice
great
to do
job of
that
that
too.
most of the time. There certainly were times that I didn't, but most of the time I did.
You did.
And because of that, not only do my children have a decent relationship, with their dad, I do too, because I took the high road.
Yeah, you
If
did.
so, if you can take the high road, it makes a difference, and you're modeling that to your children. You're modeling that kind of ability to deal with conflict to your children, and you're planting those seeds of hopefully better things ahead in the future. But that's a challenge. So number one, if you just try not to disparage the other parent. It's very easy to do, but it doesn't help the children. And keeping them out of any conflict. One of the best things that parents can do for their kids going through divorce is to not have any conflict in front of them. You know, not have any
Well,
conflict
that's
in front
kind
of
of
the
hard.
kids.
Yeah, that's ideal, of course, but wouldn't you say that when you're in an abusive relationship and when your partner is a gaslighter, a narcissist, that it's next to impossible to not have uh, um, whether it's arguments or whatever it is, difficulties in front of the kids. That's
Yeah, and
it's
I guess I'm
difficult.
I'm talking more about once you're not living together.
Oh,
Once
gotcha.
you yeah,
Okay.
once
Okay.
yeah, once if you to still be together, yes, it's so harmful for the children
Yeah.
to still be in that toxic environment. But once there's a separation of households, even if it's temporary, to keep conflict away from the kids.
100%.
That's very important. Yeah.
But, there's some parents that just don't get that, and they
Mhm.
self-indulge in being angry and reacting and doing all of that, and it's sad because they don't see the magnitude and impact, on the kids. And I remember years ago when I first started working as a therapist, probably for the first 17, 18 years of my career, I worked with kids and families, and I saw that
Mhm.
damage over and over and over again, and made me want to just shake these parents and say, what in the hell is wrong with you? You are so selfish, so selfish. And I will say that 10 million times again. And any listeners that get triggered by that, good. That's all I have to say is good. I'm okay with you being triggered. But it's when you fall prey, and nobody's perfect, but when you fall prey to needing to get revenge at your children's expense, that is a problematic parenting style. And so, if any of you are doing that, I highly recommend that you check yourself. Check yourself because your kids are suffering because you're not in control. And if you can't get in control, then go ahead, get some help. Like working with Debbie, working with anybody else that can help you get yourself back into balance so that you can show up in your best self, for your kids, in any part of your life. It's just, but it's not easy.
Not only is it not easy, there are some parents, there's something called parental alienation,
Yes.
which is when a parent is specifically trying to disparage the other parent to the point of ruining the relationship with that child.
Yeah.
And something else that I do is called reunification therapy. And I work with parents and children, or the children don't usually want anything to do with that particular parent. And it's not always due to parental alienation. Sometimes it's due to that parent's behavior,
Yes,
and
sure,
that
sure,
parent
sure.
needs to learn to be a better parent, a different kind of parent. But sometimes there's something called the parental alienation, where again, one parent's goal is to ruin the relationship of the other parent
I've
and
seen
the
that for
children, and
sure.
that's very, very different.
Awful.
It's very hard, especially when the kids, let's say, are living with the disparaging parent.
Yeah,
The majority of the time, it's you can't control what the other parent says or does,
right.
and so to maintain composure is important, but to be able to also combat some of the things that the kids are hearing, let's say from
That's
the other
different.
parent.
Yeah,
That's
that's
very
different. I love that you made that point, which is not necessarily needed to disparage the other parent who is doing the alienation, but to be able to have an opportunity to create opportunities where you get to clarify for your children. And of course,
mhm,
it's going to be up to them whether they believe it or not. And you pray, God willing, they will believe the truth, your truth. And but I love that distinction that you brought up because I think that's important, to be able to keep your voice and be able to share your truth with your children if you're going through that. Now, on this podcast, we talk about a lot of spiritual and metaphysical stuff. You know me,
mhm,
um, for a long time. Well, for about 15 years, my gifts opened up and my life changed dramatically. And
mhm,
I would, I was thinking about this when we were talking about this concept of course, doing the podcast together and this concept of relationships and navigating abuse and all of that. One of the first things that came to my mind was the tarot and this particular card in the tarot deck called the Tower. And if anybody is familiar with tarot and this card, the Tower, you'll notice that it's literally somebody jumping out of a tower that's on fire. And the connection came to me. It begged the question of how does someone excuse me y'all, how does someone develop a paradigm shift when they're having a tower moment? In other words, how is it possible that they can step into this rebirth, because that's really what it is. You're rebirthing yourself into a new identity, whether you want it or not. But there's liberation in that. There's a higher path to a breakthrough in terms of who you are when it comes to these tower moments happening. And so, how do you help people, your patients, reframe their experience that so that it allows them to step into the sense of liberation, to into the sense of I can use this in my life to be a better person. What are just a couple of tips, a couple of ways you work with your patients that help them with that?
mhm. Divorce, as you said before, it creates a transformation, whether you want one or not. You are forced into a transformation, and it often leads to emotional and spiritual growth, and we learn
Yeah.
lessons of humility, uh, acceptance, sometimes forgiveness. And there's a difference. I talk about acceptance and forgiveness
Yes.
versus forgiveness a lot.
Yeah.
Um, Personal growth and development and self-care and self-love and self-worth and all those things. So whether you want a transformation or not, it's going to happen, right? And
Right.
so in stepping into it or being forced into it, I think much of the time those who step into it are perhaps at a they're further along in the transformation versus being forced into it. And then once you kind of work through the, oh my God, how am I going to survive? How am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? How am I going to pay the bills? How am I going to get my kids to school and work and keep my house clean, which,
Yeah. Never
I did
happens, but
sometimes,
that's
I did not sometimes going through divorce,
uh,
but my kids were always, you take care of the kids, you do what you need to do first, but being forced to or stepping into a transformative experience like divorce, you have to go somewhere, especially when you have children who are dependent on you. once the sense of, okay, I'm able to survive, I can
After that
breathe,
acute
then
period, yeah,
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 then there are more opportunities for that personal growth. And what I have found, and I'm sure you have as well, um, is there is a strength discovered
yeah,
that people have no idea that they're capable of, or have, it's been hidden, or they haven't seen this person for years. This is the person I was before I got married, or this is the person I was 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 5 years. They rediscover, I guess, who they were, but they're stronger even now. And so that is something that I haven't met anybody, uh, I haven't worked with anybody who has not gotten to a point of feeling stronger and liking themselves and loving themselves a whole lot more than they did, before the divorce, certainly, and before the transformation started.
yeah. You know, it's a powerful experience, and each of us, we have our own tower moments, the ones that just blow up our lives, and nobody consciously chooses to experience those, but those listeners who've been with me for a while know that our soul chooses these experiences. We choose our partners. We often come back in the same soul families, and so everybody in the designated soul experience has a lesson to learn. And I love the way that you talked about being on the other side of it and getting to a point where you really are. Not only are you a different and better version of yourself, but you're stronger, you're more courageous. You know that you got thicker skin, you can handle more than you ever even thought you could. And that's some powerful work. So wow, that's just amazing. Now, it's interesting, this concept of self-care. It is a Sometimes it's a very ugly job. It's not pleasant, it's hard. People say, oh, self-care, take time, get your pedicure, get your bath, all of that. But the flip side of that, and I spoke to this in a podcast episode quite a while ago, but I can't remember what the title's called, but it it's not an easy thing. And it's not an easy thing even just to do on your own, let alone when you're going through a difficult time like divorce. So how do people actually really practice self-care when they're going through a divorce besides the airy fairy things that most people hear about, right? How do you help them do that? What does that look like, the actual self-care to a person going through divorce?
There's a difference between self-care and being selfish. And a lot of people, unfortunately, consider self-care being selfish because their sense of self-worth, again, is often very low. I don't deserve this. So self-care looks like a lot of different things. I think getting help from the proper resources, dealing with the trauma of being in, let's say, an emotionally abusive relationship, or just losing. Not even if it's not if it's a divorce that does not involve trauma or abuse. There's grieving. There's grieving
Yes.
of what was supposed to last a lifetime and is no longer.
Right.
It's a death of a dream. So, dealing with the grieving process, learning how to manage different things in your life, learning how to manage your finances, learning how to run a household on your own, learning how to take care of the kids on your, all these things are really self-care because it brings out the strength in us.
Hmm.
Getting help, getting therapy, understanding why we were susceptible to unhealthy relationship things, and learning how to differentiate, learning how to recognize those red flags or yellow flags so that we can, believe more in ourselves and trust ourselves more moving forward if we choose to be in a relationship again. Um, Self care does involve things like uh, physical self care, like
Yeah, it
get a
does.
massage, let's say, a lot of time because, touch is the first language that we learn. When we are born, we are touched. That's the very first sensation
Keeps us
that we
alive.
have. It does, it does, and when we get divorced, we're often losing that physical
Yeah.
contact with somebody, so even I encourage folks to get a massage, get a professional massage because not only is it good for your body and helping the nervous system sort of calm down, it's physical touch,
Mm.
and it's healing physical touch, so a lot of things people can do, working on getting support from friends, family, support groups, again, therapists, people who, can help the healing process. So self-care looks a lot like a lot of different things, but it's critical. Self-care does not mean um, retail therapy, maybe a little retail therapy here or there.
Yeah.
Self-care doesn't necessarily mean picking up drinking or doing things too much. There's a time and a place for certain things. But so self-care means a lot and it's essential. Again, it's not selfish.
Right.
It's absolutely necessary.
I agree. I agree. So before y'all, I really, in truth, I forgot to say the bio at the top end. That's what I'm going to do at the end. But do you have anything in particular, Debbie, that you want to make sure that you say that we didn't cover today? Something that you feel like those who are in unhappy marriages, or those who are considering divorce, or those who are going through the divorce process, anything that we've talked about today, anything in particular that you want to make sure that you emphasize before we come to a close today?
Well, I do want to say that if you're in an unhappy marriage, get some help first. Even when I'm doing divorce mediation, I always ask, or most of the time, probably most of the time, I ask, have you tried to get help with your marriage? And if not, I'm a big believer in trying to avoid regret.
Yeah,
And I think before ending a marriage, unless there's absolutely it's absolutely necessary to end a marriage, try to get some help first. If both partners are wanting to see what's possible, they can see what's possible.
yeah,
But if you're going through a divorce, it's also very important to understand that the way that someone feels at that moment is not necessarily the way that they're going to feel down the road. The way I feel now, it's been many, 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 many years. The way I feel now, or even 10 years ago, 15 years ago, is different than I felt when it first started. So there is hope. Life does get better. Um, and there's a lot that we could do for our own benefit as well. And not to feel, again, there's a lot of help out there too.
for sure.
So if you're married and you're unhappy in your marriage, try to get some help first. And if that doesn't work, then hopefully if you do end up getting a divorce, it's not going to be an awful, awful thing. Hopefully it will go as smoothly as possible. If you're in an abusive relationship and you really there's such an imbalance of power and they're just it's not, then you get yourself to a safe space, of course, number one. But you get the help that you need because it's really difficult, if not impossible, to do
Yeah,
this by yourself. And
yeah, makes sense. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, so Dr. Deborah Wilder is a counseling psychologist, divorce mediator, relationship and divorce expert with 35 years of experience helping individuals, couples, and families make it through their toughest challenges. She offers telehealth services in 42 states, y'all. So if any of this resonates with you and you feel a connection with Debbie, I'm telling y'all, she is amazing. Outside of being my sister, but and you need help and you want some support, please reach out to her. We're going to give you that contact information in a minute. She's active in a number of professional organizations supporting mental health and divorce. Her website is www.drdeborahwilder.com. That is spelled DRDEBORAHWILDER.com. Oh, and by the way, y'all, she wrote a chapter in this best selling book. It's called Divorce Decoded, a manifesto for women navigating divorce and beyond. And her chapter in particular is called Be the Captain of Your Divorce Ship, How to Navigate, Cope, Heal, and Rebuild. And I highly suggest that you get this book. It is flying off the shelves and it's really resonating with so many people. You can visit her resource page on her website, drdeborahwilder.com. There's a lot of information about relationship health, emotional abuse, gaslighting. There's even a free comprehensive video course specifically on gaslighting as well. And Lord knows more people need to understand what that is so that they can recognize it and learn how to deal with that if that's happening with them. And for those of you who don't know what gaslighting is, in short, it's when somebody makes you kind of believe that you're crazy for your intuition being spot on. That's really what it's about. So, in addition, she has a great course called A Crash Course Mastering the Challenges of Emotional Abuse in a High Conflict Dirty Divorce. That investment is going to be amazing for you if you really need help with that. So, you could check that out on her website. There's also a guide that goes into greater detail about the different therapeutic approaches that are helpful for emotional abuse and divorce recovery. And I tell you, when I tell you she's an expert, she's an expert. She knows her shit, y'all. So if you're struggling, if you feel like you're kind of out on your own and you don't have the support and you don't know what next steps to take, reach out, if not to her, but somebody who specializes in this process, because you don't have to do this alone. So Debbie, my sister, I love you. Thank you so
Love
much
you
for
too,
being here. It's
Janice.
been such a privilege for me. And I know you kind of get tickled because I'm your baby sister, and here I am interviewing you. But I've been excited about this, and I've been excited to let my listeners get to know you and hear about your expertise because you do a damn fine job. Anyway,
So
I,
do you, Janice. Let me just say you are a first class human. You are an absolutely wonderful sister. I adore you. I've known you for a
yeah,
long time.
a
I
very
adore you.
long
And
time.
thank you for having me here.
I'm so glad to have you here. I wish everybody a blessed day, a wonderful week, and as always, live intuitively.
Thanks for listening to The Intuitive Therapist. If you like what you heard, the best compliment you can give us is to share this podcast with a friend. And be sure to give us some stars and a favorable review at Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen in.